Okay, folks, let's get started. Oh, good job, Bridget. We can get started with Nonprofit Cafe this morning. Thank you for joining us and kind of navigating this as we learn and figure out how to host these virtually with you all. We've been adjusting it each time for the last couple of sessions, so we're grateful for your patience as we figure it all out. Bridget started a little thread in the chat if you guys just want to chime in of who you are, where you're from, so we kind of get a pulse of organizations we have present with us, and then we can kind of dive in. So I'm Maggie Crum. I am the Program and Events Manager at the Bozeman Area Community Foundation. Our mission is to connect people who care to causes that matter to build a better community. And part of the way that we do that is by supporting the nonprofit sector in general and supporting you all through professional development sessions like this. So we are grateful to be able to pivot these sessions to happen still in this time of social isolation that we are all experiencing. And we know that there's a lot going on with each organization and a lot of anxieties around fundraising in a time like this. So it seemed pertinent to host a session on fundraising in this time and get a few different perspectives. So we've got an awesome panel of folks lined up to speak to you all. I think the timing of this is pretty perfect that we've got, Give Big Gallatin Valley coming up next week, where lots of our nonprofit sector will be fundraising and might still be kind of feeling through how to make those asks or what feels appropriate. So we're hoping that we can get some ideas flowing this morning. We've got an awesome panel with Kristina Klaas, who's a nonprofit consultant, Molly Pickall from the Trust for Public Land, and Christel Chvilicek from Family Promise. So we've got a handful of folks that are here and ready to dive in. Kristina, I will hand it off to you.
Okay, can you hear me okay, Maggie?
I can, and then just remember to kind of flag me when you need me to switch slides.
Perfect, thank you so much. And thank you again to everyone who's here, who's taking the time to participate in Nonprofit Cafe. Just echoing everything that Maggie shared, was that we recognize that these are turbulent times and a lot of uncertainty is in front of us right now. And so just appreciate your time and interest and participating in this Nonprofit Cafe about fundraising and how we move forward, what that looks like in this phase of COVID-19 and this new normal that we're going to experience. I'm Kristina Klaas. I am a nonprofit consultant. I work with small to mid-sized organizations, particularly with fundraising efforts, a lot of variety of work, but really focus in on fundraising strategy as well as major gifts. As we go through the presentation, you'll hear from both myself, Molly, and Christel, and in doing so, we're going to be able to provide different strategies and thought processes on how we move forward. So when we begin within my presentation, I'll be focusing more on some higher level strategies and best practices, just some basic takeaways for everyone who's participating today. And then you'll be able to hear from both Molly and Christel providing frontline, in the weeds perspectives of how they've had to pivot their organizations, whether they're responding directly to the crisis or needing to fundraise amidst the crisis and as that moves forward. A quick note as well is just, we hope that this presentation is interactive. As Bridget and Maggie have always said with Nonprofit Cafes, this is for you, the participants, our community. So please feel free to use the chat box at any time. We do have, of course, a time limit and want to be very respectful of your time as well. So feel free to add in your information or questions that you might have. If something really resonates, let us know so that we can, or for your own community members, so that we all know what is maybe working or not, or suggestions. So don't be afraid of the chat box. Maggie, I'm good for the next slide. So Bridget got us started with this, which is awesome. And if you haven't already, we'd love for you to be able to share in the chat box a little bit about who you are, so we get to know on this virtual platform who's represented in the virtual nonprofit cafe room today. What's your role, what organization you're with, and we'd love to also frame the conversation, being able to create that sense of community, because as Maggie said, there are a lot of different feelings right now. So I'd love to just everyone to take a couple of seconds and think about what's a word or phrase about how you yourself are feeling about fundraising in this current climate. You may feel anxious, you may feel like you've got it under control, but let us know how you're feeling, and this will be really great for us to understand where we are, but also know that we're not alone. So I'll give that just a few seconds, and then Maggie, when you're ready, we can switch. Awesome. It's looking, thanks so much for everyone who's putting their thoughts in. Feel pressure, feel challenged, optimistic, a couple of different perspectives. So we're hoping today to be able to put some ideas and some topics that might be useful to counterbalance any of those feelings, or to, especially those optimistic ones, help push that forward. All right. So we'll start off today going through some key insights, and we've got 10 of them that we've pulled together between myself, Molly, and Christel in our different presentations, some really just tangible ways to frame how you move forward with fundraising. So the first one is, your mission didn't stop. Why should your fundraising? Now is not the time to stop asking for support. Essentially, we give you permission to keep moving forward, even if you're not a frontline organization, as we're calling these days, those organizations that are responding to immediate crisis. It's okay to keep moving forward. It's not our job to assume that a donor is unable or uninterested in making a gift. So move forward, keep the momentum going. Number 2, fundraising is all about authentic relationships, and even more now. It's important to stay connected today, tomorrow, in the next 6 months. We have to maintain those relationships. One of those ways is pulls right in from number 3, which is call your donors. Reach out to them. If you have their contact information, give them a personal call. Make that connection authentic. If you've had a great conversation with the donor, or maybe didn't go so well, let us know in the chat box. We want to celebrate those good moments, and we can be there to lift each other up too when it's not so great. Number 4, take the time to evaluate your fundraising efforts. Understand what's working, but then also understand if there's something you could be doing differently. This is the time where we all are having to pivot, and we'll talk here about that in a little bit. I'll dive into transitioning to digital platforms and moving our annual campaigns to digital. But this is the time to really understand what's working, what's not, how do we move forward? And in doing so, keep in mind, number 5, be sensitive, creative, and confident. Number 6, let your organization's missions and values guide your appeals. As you're talking with your donors, keep that in mind. As you're looking at funding opportunities, make sure you know what your mission is, what your programs are, what your values are. That's going to help you avoid something that we often call in the sector as mission creep. May not be seeing it now, but you might see it in the future. And it's great just to keep in mind, where are you going? Who are you as an organization? And keeping that in mind as you're looking at your funders, as well as communicating with your donors. Number 8, strengthen your nonprofit's case for giving. Now is more than ever the time to make sure that you have a rock solid case for giving. As we are pivoting our efforts, as we have so many organizations that are in need, so much noise in this community of the nonprofit community asking for money, or just being at home, hearing and having more access to information, make sure that your case is clear. Number 9, leverage technology. again, we'll pivot into this here in just a minute, but leverage technology. I think today and everything that we are doing, but Nonprofit Cafe is one of those moments of where we're leveraging and utilizing technology. We've all been forced to adapt, even our donors. It's not as scary as we thought it was before. So figure out how can you use that to your organization's advantage. And then finally, and perhaps number 1 and number 10 are if you take anything away today, are the most important pieces. But number 10, take care of yourself. Reach out, know that you're not alone. We have this beautiful community surrounded by Bozeman Area Community Foundation. Reach out to your peers, reach out to colleagues at other organizations. You never know when asking a question might spark another conversation about ways that you could collaborate, ways that you could not reinvent the wheel, but rather figure out how you can be more successful as an organization. But you can't do that if you're not caring for yourself at the same time, taking a moment to breathe, taking a moment to step back and say, okay, we've got this. Our feet are attached and our arms are here, and we can move forward. All right, so those are our 10 tips for moving forward. So I'm gonna dive in here. And again, feel free if you have questions, add them in the chat box and we'll get to them later on in the session. But I'm gonna dive in a little bit further here on our annual campaigns and how are we pivoting? How can we pivot? What are some good steps for looking at turning what used to be, for many of us, a very print-focused effort to digital? So I wanted to frame that by some statistics that were actually released yesterday. And if you haven't ever heard of the M&R benchmark survey, I'd recommend just screenshotting this slide or Googling it, making a note to look at it. It's chock full of information, and it's really great for nonprofits to understand the digital sphere. But in these statistics that were released yesterday, and it helps, I think, frame where not only are we turning out of COVID-19 crisis, but also where our sector is heading and diversifying how funds come in. So the first stat that I kind of hit me was, 1, nonprofits raised 10% more revenue online in 2019 than the year before. We're super interested to hear what happens in 2020. And then in 2019, Facebook processed 3.5% of all nonprofit revenue raised online. 26% of those donations were made in November and December. Some of that's not going to probably be too surprising with Giving Tuesday and year-end appeals, but 3.5% of all revenue is a pretty significant number as we head into the digital sphere and how we pivot. Maggie, we can go ahead and move on. Perfect. So really want to make sure not only do you have some takeaways of ways to move forward with fundraising and strategy, but also things that you can achieve as you pivot and think about within your organization moving to digital platforms. They not only help us with reducing oftentimes cost and time, and we're able to react a little bit faster, but there are a few ideas that I'd like to share today that are great to have a strong foundation for moving forward. 1, set aside 2 hours to review your fundraising. If you have it, your communication strategies and plans for the current year. Take a look at that. See, okay, what has been working so far this year? What has been working as we pivot and make responses to the COVID-19 crisis and moving forward? Make sure that it allows you to keep moving forward, as I mentioned earlier, keep moving forward, not stopping our fundraising, but how do those efforts, what do those look like, and what might need to change? Make a short-term plan. We're not really sure what's going to happen. No one has a magic 8 ball to say in 6 months we'll be back to normal. Many of us are looking at this and have to focus our efforts on a long-term framework and planning effort. So think about what that looks like. Other thing I would challenge you to do is think about how your current efforts might actually be impacted by provisions that are in the CARES Act, whether it's the $300 universal deduction or impacts that are being being changed with provisions for required minimum distributions. I won't get into those too much, but just keep in mind as you're looking at that, how might you need to adjust your efforts to retain donors or maintain relationships with current donors who may not give this year. And then number two, oh, sorry, looks like our numbering got off, but number two, review your nonprofit's website. Take a look. When was the last time that you tested the donation links? When was the last time that you made a test donation to just see what the information looks like from the donor's perspective? As we anticipate more online donations coming in, this is a great time to just take a quick moment, see what that looks like. Is your contact information up to date? Do donors know how to reach out to you? If they want to make a donation, is it easy? Is it simple? Or is there a barrier? How do you build that into your planning for the next few months so that you set yourself up for success? And then number three, look at your GuideStar profile. There's other watchdog sites, but as we also pivot to digital efforts, take a look at how, if someone is Googling your nonprofit, what are they going to find? And if they go to a GuideStar or other watchdog, what does it look like? And with GuideStar, you have the opportunity to provide some great information, impact numbers, financials, missions, program, all of those pieces. It's your opportunity to put the right foot forward, fill that out, make it easy for your donors as well to be able to learn more about you. Maggie, we can move forward. All right, so I'd love to hear in the chat box, as I move through the next few slides, I'd love for anyone who has ideas or thoughts to share back with our community here a couple of ideas. In the past few weeks, we've all had to pivot our efforts, maybe stopped campaigns or moved a campaign from an event from an in-person scenario to a virtual platform. How have you done that over the past few weeks? If you've been able to do that, have you had wins or have you had lessons learned? How have you been able to transition, or what does that look like? And then at the same time, maybe you just found a favorite tool that helped you, that enabled you to move your efforts online. What did that look like? Go ahead and add those into the chat box, and I'll keep moving forward here. Maggie. Perfect, thank you. So key recommendations, as we move and consider these ideas, once you've got your plan, we talked about that earlier and I'm just gonna reiterate it again, make the transition and create a plan. Make sure everyone involved is aware of timelines, processes, goals. There's so many different moving parts now as we're transitioning to online. It's important to have that buy-in from the team, but also there's a lot of competing interests. There's a lot of different avenues that we're having to respond to. So make sure there's understanding and clear expectations and goals that are set forth. You also may decide as you're putting the plan together, you don't have the capacity for your staff to implement everything that you were hoping to do. So maybe this is your moment to say, okay, we can do 3 things. What are we gonna do in the next 3 months? And over the course of a year, here's where we'd like to be. We'd love to be implementing text to give. We'd love to be implementing videos in our emails. But what we can do right now is implementing or embedding videos in our emails. And that's what we're gonna do to help increase our giving. Figure out a few and move forward. Number 2, segment your email list. It's the same as if you were doing a traditional print campaign, but we don't always segment and think about how are we reaching these individual donors? Could we change the messaging? But also think about too, when was the last time you looked at your donor database? When was the last time you took a look at your email list and cleaned it up? These are moments now more than ever to also be able to make sure that that data is clean, just like we would with the data append for our traditional print campaigns. We've got to do the same thing for our emails, because we're also going to be sending more messages via email and hitting that message 2-3 times, which we wouldn't be sending as many print pieces originally. All right, number 3, Include a clear, consistent call to action. Same thing, again, like you would in your print campaign, but really having that clear call out button, whether it's on a Facebook campaign or in an email or in a text to give effort, really making sure that the donor knows what are they giving to and why. Again, going back to that list of top 10, being specific and letting the donor know what's going to happen, what are they giving to. And then number 4, make it easy for a donor to give if they have the ability, or if you have the ability as an organization to have a campaign specific landing page. That's awesome. If not, make it really easy. Make sure, again, as you're testing those donation links, are there barriers? What does that look like? And know what that is. So if a donor calls up who's maybe not as tech savvy, you're able to walk them through and know what those steps look like. Right, and thanks to everyone who's adding how they've pivoted and what they've used online. It looks like, just keeping a quick eye on it, some really great resources. Okay, so I wanted to also pass on some tools that I've been using both with my clients who've been pivoting. We've been looking at different ways to be more efficient. So it's not always about what's the new and latest tool that we can incorporate, but we're all looking for what's cost effective, what allows us to have more time to implement, more time to engage with our donors. So I created just a brief list here, and as everyone's adding into the chat box, I hope you get a chance to look at it too, to see some tools and links that are useful. Again, this might be a good point to screenshot. I know this recording will go out as well, but if this is helpful for you to take a look at these tools, and we'll call one out, which is don't forget your cell phone. We are all engaging with our donors in unique ways, but especially as we pivot and look at raising funds online, our phone is going to be huge. Whether it's doing Instagram stories or posting videos from behind the scenes of program beneficiaries that were able to use their personal testimony, being able to incorporate that into an appeal. It doesn't have to be a beautiful video. We are looking for genuine and authentic, being able to connect with our donors in that way. And then finally, just a side note, because I have to, anytime that you choose to incorporate a new technology into your fundraising efforts, don't forget that it's great to incorporate it, but it's also most important, just as we always care about knowing and being able to test our campaign results, know that you can test the tool's effectiveness. So especially if it's something you're paying or investing in, know what that looks like in the short term, and then be able to test its effectiveness over time so that you can also report back to your board, to your staff, to your team, what's working and what's not. Okay, Maggie. All right. Last piece of information too, as we pivot, and that ties into this effectiveness, is Google Analytics. And this is a whole nother topic, but I did want to include this here just as a reminder and perhaps an introduction to some of our nonprofit community members, just to remember that Google Analytics is not just for the marketing team, but it's also for our fundraising efforts. Again, this could be something to screenshot and just keep in the back of your mind, but it allows us, as we pivot our fundraising efforts, to really understand who is coming to our website, who's coming to a campaign landing page. What does that look like? What pages are resonating with our donors? That may inform how we tailor the messaging for a digital effort, or maybe our print efforts. So keep an eye on your Google Analytics and what that looks like. If it's something, Google Analytics is like, what? I have no clue what that is. I did include a link in this slide of a great resource of just how to get started on Google Analytics. It's from an organization that works a lot with arts organizations, but this applies to anyone and everyone. Okay, Maggie. All right, and then finally, just to close, one thought as we look at fundraising in general, and from this top, 10,000 foot view down, looking down, is a nugget from a good friend of mine, Karen Lum, and she shared this earlier, a few weeks ago actually, and it's just resonated since since then with me, and I wanted to share it today because I think it's just good for us to keep in mind that what worked yesterday may not work today. So we have to be creative, we have to remain flexible, and we have to keep moving forward. So I'll pass it on to Molly, if that works, and go from there. Perfect, thank you.
Hi, thanks so much, Kristina. Can everyone hear me? I'm gonna take that as a yes. Great. So first, I want to take a moment to thank everyone for your work and dedication to improving our community, especially those of you on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic, providing housing, food, personal safety, and healthcare. I hope that all of you and your loved ones are well and staying connected and safe. And before I share thoughts and ideas on how to continue your fundraising during this pandemic, I want to give you a bit more context for my background. I've been directing the Trust for Public Lands local fundraising efforts for the last 10 years. Primarily, I work with individual major donors and foundations and engage boards and other volunteer committees in fundraising. I've led 2 successful community-driven fundraising campaigns, raising $9 million to protect the Hoback Basin in Northwest Wyoming from oil and gas drilling, and most recently leading the $12 million campaign to create Story Mill Community Park here in Bozeman, also featured virtually behind me. Both campaigns beat their goals, met their deadlines, and leveraged terrific partnerships. I also manage a team of fundraisers who direct their local programs for the Trust for Public Land in 6 other markets, from Hawaii to Texas to Maine. So the best practices and examples I will share with you in this morning draw from my own experience, but also from my amazing colleagues. So as a national organization based in San Francisco, the Trust for Public Land began monitoring and acted quickly to respond to the coronavirus outbreak. On March 16th, we transitioned our entire staff, which included 300 plus people across the country, to work from home. I'm proud and grateful to share that this transition was relatively seamless, and our executive team and board have been leading with compassion, transparency, and relentless courage to navigate this challenge for our organization. And that includes our efforts to continue fundraising. Next slide, Maggie. Thanks. So, is now the right time? Should you continue fundraising? Yes. Even if your organization, like the Trust for Public Land, is not on the front lines directly addressing the COVID-19 pandemic, yes. It's important to remember that fundraising is relationship building. It's about forming meaningful connections between your organization's mission to make a difference in the world with people who want to help make a difference in the world. Next slide, Maggie. Beyond health and safety, one of the most important things to remember during this pandemic is the power of connection. The energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. This definition is a great description for fundraising now, but always. The fundraising relationship goes both ways, between the donor and the organization. It is based in trust and communication and caring. And now a lot of people are suffering, and many donors want to support their communities and make a difference. As of April 9th, the Center for Disaster Relief Philanthropy reported that $6.8 billion has been donated globally in response to fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. If your donor wants to make a difference, why would you not give them the joy of knowing they can help you right now? It's important to remember that your loyal donors still care about you, so ask them for what you need. Next slide. So this brings me to my first point, call your donors. The first week that the Trust for Public Land staff began telecommuting, I worked with my team to organize a plan and start calling our donors. At the moment, so many of us are inundated with emails and virtual interaction like Zoom, and the power of a phone call is surprising. In one of my early conversations, a donor told me that she usually feels awkward on the phone, but now she is rediscovering the joy of phone conversations. And importantly, when you think about contacting your donors, I encourage you to prioritize those who are older or on their own and potentially suffering from the isolation of social distancing. Make these conversations meaningful. Inquire how they're doing. Listen. And share how you're doing. Your donors care about you too. In my conversations, I've confessed right away that I'm just so glad they answered the phone because I'm missing human interaction. Be honest and empathetic, and it's also okay to be a little bit more personal. I've exchanged recommendations for good books to read and shows to watch, but also how I'm coping through this by walking on my neighborhood trails. My colleague in Atlanta recently cold called one of her supporters, something that she normally wouldn't do, and she discovered quickly their conversation went deep. And she was exchanging thoughts about the power of nature and the inequity of access to the outdoors and food security. Under normal circumstances, she didn't think her conversation would have become so meaningful so quickly. And importantly, share how your organization is doing in responding to this pandemic. No one is untouched by this, so prepare talking points to share your updates. During the first week at home, I was speaking to one of my donors and telling her a story about how our team in Dallas is working to innovate and transform our process of gathering community input to build parks. Normally, we do this in person, in classrooms, and many community meetings. But obviously that's just not possible right now. I described how our Texas team is pursuing different platforms for digital and virtual engagement to interact with school students in Dallas. This donor just loved this story, and she recognized the hope and solution it was providing, and right on the spot, she offered me a $10,000 gift to further this innovation. Next slide. So I'd love to hear some ways that you're connecting with your donors as well. If you have a story to share, please go ahead and put it into the chat box. And as homework from this webinar, I encourage you to dedicate time every day for your donors. Block off an hour on your calendar and pick up your phone. Remember that meaningful connection is about being seen, heard, and valued. All right, next slide. Thanks, Maggie. So most importantly, you should not hesitate to contact your donors, but now is the time to be sensitive and creative. So when COVID-19 hit, you may have been in the midst of solicitation conversations. Do not assume that your donor no longer wants to have this conversation, but it's critical to seek permission. For instance, you could say something like, in normal times, I would be approaching you for a gift, but I'm not sure how you're feeling right now. Don't assume that you can't ask, but ask for permission first. Last month, my staff in Chicago called a program officer to see how she was doing, share how we were working remotely, and follow up on our pending letter of inquiry. The foundation responded by skipping their normal full proposal application process and selecting the strongest letters of inquiry to award unrestricted grants at a higher level than normal, which resulted in a $25,000 gift for our Chicago work. And just this Wednesday, my fundraiser in Hawaii received a wonderful surprise from one of her longtime and loyal donors who opted to double his $25,000 gift to $50,000 simply because he knew he was needed more this year than ever. Alternatively, if now is not the right time to discuss a new gift with a donor, explore other ways to be flexible. So in one instance, I reached out to a donor a few weeks ago who runs a company that has seen a dramatic change to their operations. This donor had kindly made an advance payment on their pledge at the end of the last quarter, which was wonderfully helpful for us. I asked how he and his staff were doing, and I offered to push out his next payment to the next year, acknowledging how helpful it had been to receive part of his gift early. So if you can be flexible, I encourage you to consider your donor situation and be creative with pledge commitments. Another tactic is to explore the possibility of loosening grant restrictions instead of asking for new funding. So following the lead of the Ford Foundation, more than 700 foundations across the country have pledged to ease their grant restrictions in order to provide more flexible funding, which means covering overhead and operations. If you have restricted grants in hand, consider approaching those donors to discuss redirecting these funds to where you need them most now. Another giving vehicle to consider is planned giving. And to be clear, I'm not suggesting that you launch a planned giving campaign right now. That would be insensitive. However, it's important that you have the details of your planned giving program handy for your conversations with donors. During times of uncertainty, deferred giving acknowledges short-term concerns and provides an avenue for continued engagement. And research shows that life events, just like this pandemic, drive estate planning behavior. And on top of that, life income gifts, particularly charitable gift annuities, are especially appealing because they offer the donor a steady source of lifetime payments that are not subject to market fluctuations. So again, it's not a great time for planned giving, but it is a window of opportunity for those who want to leave their mark on your organization. I can share that we've seen an uptick at the Trust for Public Land from donors inquiring about making planned gifts to us. And don't forget, prioritize your planned giving donors for your phone calls. These donors have already invested their legacy in your future with their commitment, so be sure to personally share with them how you're doing and responding to this pandemic. Next slide. Oh, sorry, actually go back, Maggie. Thanks. It's also important to remember that despite the decline of the economy, there are still robust resources for fundraising. So one great vehicle is the billions of dollars that are sitting in donor-advised funds. These funds have already been gifted by donors and are sitting and waiting to be distributed to worthy organizations. This method of giving has seen an astronomical rise in recent years. Donor-advised funds took in more than $37 billion in 2018 alone. So no surprise, donors are using these resources to support the nonprofits that they love right now. Fidelity, Schwab, and Vanguard have all reported more than a 20% increase in DAF distributions during the first quarter of 2020 compared to last year. For Fidelity, that amounted to $1.7 billion in outgoing grants. And Bridget tells me that the Bozeman Area Community Foundation is also seeing an uptick in these distributions. So now is a good time to remind donors of the special value of their DAF and that this is an especially advantageous time to use it. Here's an idea from one of my colleagues in Minnesota. Create an appeal from your organization to remind donor-advised fund donors that they have this ready resource to support the organizations they love. Pull a report of your donors and make sure this outreach is sent to donors who have previously supported you by using a DAF. Lastly, in all of your efforts, be sure to engage your board members. I understand that for some of you, it might be your board member who is the most vocal opponent of fundraising right now. And if I was in your shoes, I would do a little assessment and ask myself, does this board member count my organization as one of their top 3 philanthropic commitments? Odds are that they don't, and I'm giving you the permission to acknowledge but disregard their opinion. Some of you may be familiar with fundraising consultant Gail Perry, who says, it's the job of the board to ensure financial stability. If some board members think it's unseemly to seek support right now, you need to ask them politely to get over themselves. They are not asking personally. This is not about them personally. It's the organization's mission that is doing the asking. So my fundraiser in Dallas has built a really great board of dedicated volunteers who believe in the power of parks to address inequities in some of Dallas's most underserved neighborhoods. And through this crisis, his board has doubled down on their efforts and continue to make major peer-to-peer asks and are even successfully recruiting 2 new board members this month. Okay, now I'm ready for the next slide. So I just shared a bunch of strategies that you can consider to be flexible, creative, and sensitive to your donors while putting your organization's needs forward. I'd love to hear other creative ideas that you're using. So if you have one, please type it into the chat box. And for homework from this webinar, I challenge you to work on 1 to 2 new strategies to try out now with your fundraising efforts. Great. Next slide, Maggie. Thank you. So now is the time to be thinking about the long run. We may be starting to resume some normal activities here in Montana, but the reality is that the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic will likely be felt by your organization for at least the next 12 to 18 months. Now is the time for you and your organization's leaders and board to be considering what's needed to sustain you through this challenging time and thrive in the long run. This means you need to be clear about what you need and how you're responding to this pandemic. You can't simply ask for a donor's gift because your work is important. As an example, on Earth Day, the Trust for Public Land launched this call to action. We believe everyone deserves a park, and yet across the country, more than 100 million people, a third of us, including 28 million kids, don't have a park within a 10-minute walk of home. The COVID-19 crisis shows that in too many communities, parks and accessible natural areas are considered a privilege when they should be available to all. The Trust for Public Land is working hard every day to bring parks and green spaces to where they're needed most, and you can help. Through uncertain times, donors like you sustain our ability to bring parks and green spaces to all. In another example, one of my dear friends shared with me that as CEO of her nonprofit, she's digging in to consider the tough decisions her organization might need to face. She will be asking her board to stick with her and to give more generously. And so in turn, she knows she needs to consider where to make hard but necessary decisions for the organization's bottom line. However, to be clear, do not look to cut your fundraising resources for short-run gain. This will only serve to harm you in the long run. Gail Perry recommends outsourcing your accounting or your bookkeeping if you have to, but keep the people and the resources that sustain your relationships and thus your fundraising. Lastly, be inclusive and share these challenges with your most generous and loyal donors. They are your partners, and they want to know and understand the challenges you are facing and the strategies you are pursuing. Next slide. Lastly, I want to recognize that these conversations are not easy. In isolation from your colleagues and friends, and in the face of harrowing news that we receive every hour of every day, this is a difficult time to have confidence. Even the most experienced fundraisers are feeling untethered. Not all of your conversations will be positive. Not all of your donors will want to talk to you, and some of your supporters are really hurting. But you can't let one conversation stop you from having the next conversation. Remember, don't assume, but instead ask permission of your donors. As a personal reminder, I have this quote, "Smooth seas do not make for skillful sailors," on a sticky note next to my computer. It's a reminder that through the challenge, we get better. And one last story for you. My former boss was always great about putting the fun in fundraising. She loved music and dancing, and she asked her senior leadership team to select our personal walk-up songs. And she would introduce us at meetings with our walk-up songs. And so for those of you who are sports fans, this is the song that's played when the batter approaches first place. It's a song that lifts your spirits, gets you amped, and builds your confidence and courage. My walk-up song, because I'm a big fan of the movie Remember the Titans, is Marvin Gaye's Ain't No Mountain High Enough. And some days it's Lizzo. And some of you may have seen this TikTok video of a group of nurses from Philadelphia who start their day at a drive-up COVID-19 testing site by singing and dancing together to Sierra's song, Level Up. This song reminds them to step up to the task at hand and have confidence and trust in each other to get through the day. Next slide. So before I wrap up, I would love to hear what's your walk-up song, what gets you excited and confident to take on the world. please go ahead and type it in the chat box. And if we get a lot of great selections here, I think we need to create a Nonprofit Cafe fundraisers playlist. And lastly, it's important to remember that even through the recession, many people didn't stop giving. The data shows that the dollar amount they gave may have changed, but most people gave a consistent percentage of their income. So donors will give, they're doing it now, but you have to ask. Thanks. I'm going to turn it over to Christel.
Christel, we can't hear you.
Now can you hear me?
Yes, you can. I was trying to
Sorry.
click the button, it wasn't working.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So my name is Christel Chvilicek. I'm the Executive Director of Family Promise here in Bozeman. I've been in the nonprofit world for about 13 years, and most of that time has been spent in fundraising. In 2016, I got my CFRE, and so I just have a passion for this work and helping the community. And so with that, I kind of have a hard act to follow with Molly and Kristina, but I'm going to go ahead and try now. So Molly, thank you. So my slides really are my perspective. I am working for a frontline organization right now, and so I hope you guys understand that this is something that I feel we all need to be doing. Right now in this time, our donors are going to be really happy to hear you. They are stuck at home. They've slowed down. They've been kind of forced into a new normal where they're not being able to connect with their communities. They will be really excited for you to reach out. They are looking for opportunities to, stay connected. They want to hear what you're up to. They want to have those conversations. And, people in the fundraising world, they really know that that's where these conversations start, and eventually, they lead to a donation. So just asking them how they're doing will relate in that conversation of what is your organization doing during this difficult time. It's something really important to keep in mind is that if your organization served an important need in the past, it still serves an important need even during these difficult times. It's a good way to really, I know there's the healthcare workers and, like myself working with homeless families and, food insecurities and things like that happening. But in reality, nonprofit work, you have your mission and you have your vision, and you are always important no matter what. And so really taking this time to really reflect on that and really reiterate what is the importance of my organization and how can I share that with my donors. I think it's also really important to always know that it's never bad to invite people to help. In crisis situations, people want to help out, and you should really give them that opportunity. And so without giving them that opportunity, you're only, hurting yourself. And this is a big one. I know there's probably a lot of misconception with this, but there are people right now that have more money to give now than they will or they have in the past. We know that the stock market is in turmoil and the worldwide economy is more uncertain, than it's ever been. But it's not necessarily true that people don't have money to give. There are people that are in retirement age and they have consistent income from their Social Security or different kind of retirement funds. People are staying home, and so they aren't spending as much money on, car expenses, entertainment, clothing. And so I think that's really important for us to realize and really consider, and I do want to reiterate, we also know that there are people that are in a tougher situation and they've lost their jobs and they are trying to cut costs. But, really keep in mind that there are donors that they're going to be able to give more than they've ever been able to in a time like this. And really, it's all about segmenting that database and really identifying who they are. Maggie, do you want to do the next slide for me? Great. Okay, so I have kind of a little take-home activity that I thought you guys would really appreciate kind of doing with your staff or yourself or, whatever that, entails for you. So I want you guys to take a list and really define what you believe your myths are in this fundraising environment. A few things that I've heard is, I don't want to take money away from the frontline nonprofits that are doing the work right now. I've also heard people don't care about my mission right now. And so I've heard these, and I know you guys have heard them, and I also know you're feeling them. And so I want you to make this list. Tell yourself and then tell yourself, I'm going to be a myth buster. And how do you do that? And so you want to eliminate all those bad myths and then really communicate about how you're going to eliminate those thoughts from others as well. So a few things to help eliminate those myths is really that transparency piece. The world is a world that we've never seen before, and really being transparent with our donors, telling them how you're feeling, what you're worried about, what your fears are, which really lays into that vulnerability piece as well. Letting them know that you're worried about what the next 3 months are going to look like. Another important thing is really humanizing the approach. You've all seen Jimmy Kimmel, and they're doing these live TV shows from home, but really humanizing it so people understand, do a video of you at home with your kids in the background, because you're, not only are you working, but you're also being a stay-at-home teacher now. Take a walk in your building and show people the empty hallways and how that makes you feel. That, being human and showing your donors that really builds that connection and builds that emotion piece as well. And lastly, you've got to be fun and unique in this environment. We are being, inundated with what, the virus and what's happening. And it's just a good opportunity for people to say, hey, let's make, let's have a little fun with this and be unique and draw people in. And so with that, just another little prompt, we're trying to all still stay connected, is in the chat box, if you wouldn't mind, sharing a myth of why you shouldn't fundraise and maybe how you're going to bust through it. If you want to go to the next slide, please. Perfect. So I wanted to share some PR and social media examples. I've been kind of, like everybody else, we've been on the internet more. The first figures from Forbes, and this was, I think, at the end of March, they said that the internet usage was at 70%, which is huge. And so knowing that, how can you get in front of these people that are staying at home? But once again, how do you be unique? I saw this little COVID-19 is here, and so is kitten season. And really, letting people know that just, that you still have work to do. There's how to support the arts and artists during the COVID-19. And I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen it, but the Georgia Aquarium and the Atlanta Humane Society, they partnered up and had all these adoptable dogs running through the aquarium. And so really just, as you're communicating with these donors and trying to get in front of them, making it unique, and once again, reiterating that your mission is still just as important during this, difficult time. Do you want to go? Thank you. So one thing that I really wanted to reiterate here is that we really don't know how long this pandemic's going to last. It could be, another year. It could be a couple months. There's just this uncertainty. And what I'm really trying to reiterate is that we need to breathe, and we need to plan, and we need to not try to panic. And if we, continue forward with our mission and communicating what we're doing, it will help with all that. I also want to reiterate that, I know there's a lot happening right now, and it takes a lot to change someone's passion. I am an animal lover, and I don't think anybody would ever take that from me. And so I tend to donate to, animal organizations. And I know that maybe donors right now are, giving some donations to the frontline workers, but in reality, you can't change that passion. And here, eventually, if you keep communicating that with them and keep connecting them, they're still going to be donating to what's passionate for them. And last but not least, stay connected and get people engaged. You can't just stop now. We need, speaking candidly from a frontline worker, is that, we deal with homeless families and we try to empower them, and we can't do that alone. And I just want to reiterate how important it is that we still have arts, we still have parks, we still have museums, all those kinds of things, because that's what makes families whole. And so I want everybody to continue forward and kind of that permission that it's okay to keep fundraising and working towards what you're trying to accomplish. So that is all I have.
Thank you so much, everybody. Okay, so we have about 30 minutes left, which I feel like we'll probably end up closing early, but we do want to leave time for questions. We intentionally left a lot of time for questions and conversation. I know there's a lot going on in the chat box over here, thanks to Molly and Kristina and Christel for getting that conversation going. Molly, I'm loving seeing these songs coming through. So thank you for that. But if anyone has specific questions or things that they want to kind of address with our presenters, we have them here for the next short bit. So please feel free to either unmute yourself or chime in on the chat.
Maggie, while we wait for some questions, I just wanted to share some of the input that I saw in the chat box that I thought was great. One, Kate, I appreciated that you shared that you're admittedly phone shy. I think that applies to a lot of us, that we just get so used to communicating with each other digitally. So I encourage you to give it a shot and try it out. I have really been surprised by how easy and wonderful these conversations are, and how great it feels to connect with someone by voice if I can't see them in person. I also loved Krista shared a really phenomenal phased approach that her organization is taking to being organized and thoughtful about their personalized outreach. She shared a great idea of what they're doing of creating a digital conversation, of hosting a webinar like this with experts related to their organization. We're doing the same thing at the Trust for Public Land, and we're calling them virtual park bench chats, featuring our CEO and subject area experts, and we're inviting our donors to attend those in lieu of being able to get together for in-person events.
I wanted to chime in too on Christel's conversation about or Christel's topic about being human. I guess everyone, each of you addressed this in your conversations a little bit, but being, being human with your donors and allowing yourself to have those moments. I was on the phone with a donor yesterday when it started to, downpour hail here. Like we got on the phone and a few minutes in, it just started pouring hail, and her kids came running in and my dog started freaking out, and we were on the phone together just kind of laughing at the whole situation. And she's like, Maggie, I gotta call you back. And then, we got to resurface and just be like, oh my gosh. And we took a few minutes out of our, donor related conversation and just were like, this is a bananas time to be alive and be living through this life. And she's like, who what can come next, I guess. All of the things that life is throwing at us, and then torrential downpour of hail. It's good to laugh with each other. Let's see, what else?
Maggie, there's some great questions here about pivoting board meetings online. And then also we have, oops, I just lost it, Barb from the Park County Community Foundation. Curious to hear about how Gallatin County folks are approaching Give Big next week, now that it's online.
Do you have any, before we move to that, does anyone have responses to the board meetings virtually, or ideas for that, or ways to keep their board members engaged?
Sure, we are, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm working with a couple different organizations, some of whom have already been hosting their board meetings online, but they've found that they have to utilize different platforms to make them more efficient and effective. But then at the same time, other organizations were finding ways to, of course, pivot those board meetings online, but also finding ways to engage board members in the day-to-day efforts around fundraising. So if in the past board members were calling donors or sending, quarterly board meetings, they would sign handwritten thank you notes. That's not really feasible right now. But setting those board members up for success, giving them scripts, talking points, letting them know and having it written out. What is the response for the organization to COVID-19? What are some immediate needs? What are some feel-good stories, so that they have talking points? But then, just as both Molly and Christel reiterated, being able to have those connections and having them call. and just check in or send an email if that's all you have available. But being able to utilize that has been helpful. And I'd love to hear what Molly and Christel, what you've been doing as well.
We have the challenge that we usually have a multi-day retreat in the spring, and we've obviously had to cancel that. And so we're compressing a multi-day meeting into a morning, but it still means it's going to be a long time to be on the phone and digitally. So we're going to split it into chunks and actually give people half an hour, 45 minutes where we're turning off Zoom, go do the emails or phone calls you needed to make, come back, and we're being really conscientious about how we're chunking our topics so that you can actually disconnect from it and you don't have to come back and restart the conversation. Also, to your really great point, Kristina, about how to shift digitally, one thing you can ask of your board members right now is to really dig in with you digitally, to share the new things you're creating with online content, to, if they don't already like and share and whatnot on their social media platforms, to do that and to talk about the good that your organization is doing. For those of you that are exploring this idea of creating a virtual conversation like this for your donors, ask your board members to invite 5 of their contacts to come to these meetings.
And then I can kind of chime in. We were in the middle of planning a 5-year strategic planning session, and we are doing that virtually now. So there's a lot of pre-work involved, and then we're breaking it up into smaller sections. But it will all be done virtually with a little bit more activity and pre-work and understanding that people can't sit in front of a computer screen for 8 hours. We had also done a interested board training virtually. And so we had a couple board members come, we did a presentation. We actually delivered lunch to the potential board members at their doorstep. And it personalizes it a little bit.
I love that idea.
Great.
We have a couple of comments in the chat about Give Big this year. I think there's a good kind of article summarizing Give Big this year in the Bozeman Daily Chronicle yesterday. So I would suggest that everyone go and take a look at that. We posted it on our Facebook page. So if you want to like it and share it from there, I will put a plug for you to do that. Yeah, I think we've tried to implement a lot of the things that have been discussed generally in this session throughout Give Big, and providing a lot of resources for nonprofits too, specific to COVID-19, and just remembering that the nonprofit sector is the fabric of our community, and if it is going to survive through this, we need to fundraise through this. And Give Big is a good way to connect with donors and highlight the sector as a whole and all of the hard work that you all do each day. So I think really getting to the core of what Give Big is and connecting donors with causes that they care about, or maybe a cause they didn't know existed in the community, and even causes that they might utilize the services of on a day-to-day basis, but don't realize is supported by a nonprofit behind the scenes. I think there's a lot of ways to engage our community daily, but Give Big is just a good way to highlight that all in one day. So that's our hope for Give Big this year. Okay, does anyone, I'm getting a couple of questions about recordings of this. Yes, we will have a recording of this session available on our website. So on the bozemanfoundation.org website under Nonprofit Cafe. It'll probably be put, I'll try to link it at the bottom of the page. There's like a schedule. You can find the recording from last month's session there as well. And then I'll also make a PDF of the slides. I'm thinking that I'll add maybe a page at the end with just bullet points of like different resources that people brought up in the chat box of like donor management software you've implemented recently or different ideas. It won't be the prettiest slide, but it'll at least capture what's happened in the chat in the slides for you to utilize later. And Kristina, I'll edit our numbers. I think they must have gotten messed up from exporting Google. Oh, thank you, Eric, for kind of summarizing some takeaways here. Kristina, is that I know.
Yeah, it's a great segue, Eric. Thanks so much. I had chatted with Maggie about this, that just kind of tying the beginning of the presentation together and everything that both Molly and Christel have shared from their own, in the weeds, being able to navigate through some really great tips. And we've all shared a lot of information, but don't want it to be overwhelming, because everything else right now can feel that way. But we'd love for everyone who's able to, who has time, to just follow Eric's lead, which is perfect. A couple of takeaways. What is something new that you learned, or information that or actions that you'd like to take today, next week, something that how you're going to adjust your mindset? So if you don't mind adding in the chat box a couple of those takeaways, it would be great for all of us to hear, and even just reiterate and remind ourselves and hold ourselves accountable, and our colleagues as well, moving forward into the next few days, weeks, months, whatever this looks like, because we really are in it together. All right. Awesome. Mackenzie's going to do her myth busting. I can say I need to figure out what my walk-up song is, Molly. There are a lot.
You don't have to choose just one.
Right.
If anybody got lots of people on this call got my give big preparing final information, big, huge email yesterday. And if you made it down all the way and read the whole thing and got to my PS at the bottom, you will know that a really embarrassing song has popped into my head daily for the last month. And it's the chorus of We're All in This Together from High School Musical. Where they're dancing in the gym together, which I don't even know if I've ever seen it, but yeah. So there's a fun little link in that email if anyone wants to have High School Musical make a feature in their Friday. Go read the email and then get to the PS. This is great. Lots of people saying that they realize some myths they need to bust and some takeaways from this session. So we are echoing the gratitude and gratefulness that's showing up in this chat feature to Molly, Kristina, and Christel. Thank you so much for spending time on this over the last week and sharing your thoughts and answering some questions with the community. So we are grateful for you all and won't take up any more of your time.
Hey, Maggie, one last quick thing. Do they have our contact information if they have any other questions after this?
Sure, I can add your emails to your slides. I'll just put it with your introduction slide.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Maggie. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone.
Happy birthday.
For the time.
Thank you, guys. Have a wonderful Friday.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.